The Y chromosome. Okay, I know many of us have most likely looked around online and we've come across little tidbits here and there on a number of different websites and blogs. Many of which essentially hint, and others just flat out state, that males, are half a person because we have half of a chromosome, being the Y chromosome. Now, along with this, we also find a number of feminist academics that go as far as saying that men, or males, essentially anyone who carries a Y chromosome, is going to be going extinct because it keeps getting shorter and shorter over millennia. In a sense, they are correct as far as some of their measurements go, but they are utterly wrong and misguided when it comes to their conclusions. This can be seen within the realm of evolution. The ability of a species to mutate and change over time. It is specifically because of the Y chromosome that our species has been able to evolve. Upon closer analysis of the Y chromosome and the loss of coding language that is imprinted on the chromosome, is most of what's being dumped is crap genetic coding. Stuff we don't really need anymore. And the fact that it has been accelerating over the last few centuries should leave an honest analyst with the conclusion that the human race is currently mutating and evolving. We can trace these mutations and the rate of mutations so accurately that we are currently using them to trace our family lineage, going all the way back to when our ancestors first left Africa, being pseudo-modern Homo sapiens. Not exactly referring to the now extinct species of human, being the Denisovians. I always pronounce that one wrong. And the Neanderthal. Now, getting back on point, what we have here is evolution and mutation can only occur on the Y chromosome, because the Y chromosome has a single copy of the genetic coding. The X chromosome has two copies of the genetic coding. So if something is a little off on the X chromosome, typically what happens is the correct coding on the other half of that chromosome can correct for that mistake. With the Y chromosome, the male line, that does not happen. Those mutations then get passed down through the generations. So one could say that these academics, while being able to measure and understand the Y chromosome to some extent, have come to the wrong conclusion based on their own bias ideologies. The very fact that humans have been able to adapt to so many different environments can be traced solely on the Y chromosome, and only on the Y chromosome. I find this interesting, that this basic concept that any analyst, and you don't even have to be professionally, that's the wrong term, formally, educated in the subject. It isn't necessary. Anyone with a brain can learn how to essentially look at numbers and compare. So the question is, why are they constantly pushing that men are half of a person as a result of this chromosome that has benefited all of throughout the entirety of the human race? I believe this is a way for them to come to terms with the fact that human evolution and the advancement of our species and the adaptation of our species rests solely on the Y chromosome. It rests within males to advance the rest of us. We can also see this almost exactly with our behavioral traits and our personal desires to build, to create, to overcome. Whereas most feminist ideology is essentially to employ critical theory and complain and bitch and moan until you get what you want. These distinctions are not separate. They're not in a glass jar. We can almost see how the human race advances not just by the creation of society and culture and the creation of new technologies, but we can also see a similar pattern down to the level of our genes. Let's say, for instance, because of the dual copies that women have, they don't change. They don't change. Well, they do, but it once again only comes from the father. Now, if a man only has sons, alright, he will pass on his Y chromosome, which does not change from generation to generation, aside from the random mutations, which is how we can essentially track the path of human migration across the globe. We can't do that with females because it auto-corrects. Now with men, in order to disseminate these new codes into the rest of the population, we essentially must have daughters. The reason being is our X chromosomes that we pass on, unlike our Y chromosomes, which don't change and get passed directly from father to son, the X chromosomes that the males pass on to their daughters actually has been altered by the presence of their original Y chromosome. The genetic material gets mixed up. We either produce a X sperm or a Y sperm, but only if we pass our genetic material to a daughter does that mutation get disseminated through the rest of the population. because once it goes to its daughters, it goes to both. That change goes to both their daughters and their sons. I cannot imagine that these academics are this stupid to not recognize this. Since essentially any layman can go and study for about a week and come to a similar conclusion. And I'm not talking just laymen. There are plenty of other academics out there that get drowned out in the shouting match. I would have to argue that the feminist academics that are making these claims are doing so as a result of their own inferiority complex of some sort, derived from something in their own personal history, as well as to garner additional support from the female population, especially those that tend to subscribe to that form of ideology. So the next time any of us come across a similar post, keep in mind the only reason why the human race is where it is right now is a result of men and the genetic material that we carry. We change the landscape of our entire species. All women are capable of doing without us is maintaining the status quo, at least on a genetic level. But I ask of you, try and figure out for yourself what could possibly drive these women to suggest that we need to kill off all men because they're only half of a person, because they have this wonderful adaptation that allows us as an entire species to adapt and overcome essentially any environment we have ever come across. Why must they attempt to elevate women for essentially being nothing more than mediocre, essentially being nothing more than a buffer, whereas all the true innovation happens between, or while dangling between our legs?